A loving beginning. In a small, vibrant village nestled among green hills and tall trees, lived a young couple, Adebayo and Zainab. Their love was the talk of the village, and many admired the harmony and peace that radiated from their home. Adebayo, a hardworking businessman, and Zainab, a gentle and nurturing woman, had been married for 5 years. Their bond was so strong that even the whispers of passing storms in life could not break their love. Adebayo, tall and with a broad smile that could light up the darkest of days, often showed his love through small, thoughtful gestures. He worked hard as a trader, dealing in goods like spices and fabrics. His business had flourished over the years, providing for his wife and himself. He would often tell Zainab that he was determined to build a future for her, one filled with happiness, love, and all the luxuries she deserved. Zainab, with her gentle spirit and kind heart, had always stood by Adebayo, offering him unwavering support. She believed in him, often reminding him that their love was more important than any material wealth. As the days passed, they would share long walks together, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets of the village. Zainab's heart was full, and so was their home, with the warmth of their love filling every room. It was during one of these walks that Adebayo turned to Zainab and took her hands in his, gazing deeply into her eyes. "You are my heart, Zainab. There's nothing in this world I wouldn't do for you. We are one, and I will be by your side every step of the way. Even when our child comes into this world, we will be there together. Our love will guide us through it all." Zainab, smiling tenderly, replied, "Adebayo, you are my strength, my everything. I know we will face every challenge as one, just as we always have. Our love is enough." Their words carried the weight of the promise they had made to one another. No matter what life threw their way, they would always stand united. And then came the news. Zainab found out that she was pregnant. The couple was overjoyed and filled with anticipation for the arrival of their first child. "Aminu," Adebayo whispered one evening as they lay under the stars. "That's what we'll call him. Our first son, Aminu." Zainab nodded with tears of joy in her eyes, her heart swelling with love for the life they had created. The whole village celebrated with them. Zainab's belly grew, and with it, so did their excitement. Adebayo continued to work hard, ensuring that everything was in place for the new addition to their family. He promised Zainab that he would make sure their son, Aminu, would have the best life, a life full of love, warmth, and opportunities. The peace in their home was unshakable, and every night before bed, they made sure to talk through any differences, always resolving them before they closed their eyes. "No matter what, we never go to bed angry," Adebayo would say. Zainab would smile and agree, knowing how much Adebayo cherished their peace and harmony. However, despite their happiness, there was a feeling deep within Adebayo's heart that something unexpected was waiting for them. It wasn't fear, but rather an unexplainable sense of challenge that seemed to loom on the horizon. He didn't know what it was or why he felt it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect life might not stay perfect forever. Little did they know, a challenge was indeed on its way, one that would test their love, their loyalty, and the very foundation of their marriage. But for now, Adebayo and Zainab could only look forward to the arrival of their son, with hearts full of love and dreams of a future where nothing could come between them. As the days passed, they continued to prepare for Aminu's birth, and though the joy of parenthood was soon to grace their lives, there was an underlying tension in the air, a tension Adebayo could feel but couldn't yet explain. He would not share his worry with Zainab, not wanting to spoil the joy they both felt, but the unease remained, lingering quietly in the corners of his mind. The perfect world they had built together was about to face its first test, the dreaded decision. As time passed, Adebayo's business grew at an astonishing rate. His name became well known in the village and even beyond. From humble beginnings, he had built a thriving trade empire, dealing in fabrics, spices, and precious goods. His hard work, determination, and sharp mind had paid off, and Adebayo had everything he had ever dreamed of: a loving wife, a growing family, and a prosperous business. Yet, with every new success came a stronger desire for more. One day, while Adebayo was at the market discussing business matters with his suppliers, he ran into an old friend from his childhood, Musa. Musa had always been the ambitious type, always looking for ways to make quick profits. He was well known in the village for his boldness in business, though his methods were often seen as risky. "Oh, Adebayo. My brother, it's been too long," Musa greeted him warmly, pulling him into a tight hug. "Look at you. You've become a force to be reckoned with. I knew you would make it big." Adebayo smiled, flattered by the praise. "It's all thanks to the support I've had from Zainab and the grace of God," he replied humbly. "But, tell me, how have you been? What brings you back to the village?" Musa's eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint. "I've come to offer you an opportunity. A chance to make a fortune. Something that could change your life forever." Adebayo raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening." Musa leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if he were sharing a secret. "I've got contacts overseas. There's a supplier with stock of high-quality goods, fabric, spices, and other valuable items that's being sold at an incredibly low price. I've seen the quality firsthand, and I can guarantee that the market demand for these goods is going to be huge. All you need to do is invest a little more. Take out a loan, buy the goods in bulk, and you'll triple your profits in no time." Adebayo frowned slightly, considering the idea. "A loan? But I've always been careful about that. Zainab would never approve of this." Musa grinned knowingly. "I understand your hesitation, but think about it, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you don't act now, someone else will. Trust me, this will take your business to a whole new level. Zainab will understand once she sees the profits you make. Besides, you're smart enough to handle it. It's not like you're gambling, this is a sure thing." The temptation to take a risk gnawed at Adebayo. His business was doing well, but the idea of expanding quickly, of reaching greater heights, was so alluring. He thought of all the things he could provide for Zainab and their unborn son. He imagined the comfort, the luxuries, the future they could have. The desire to prove himself to Zainab and the village overwhelmed him. That night, as they sat at the dinner table, Adebayo could barely focus on the meal. Zainab, noticing his distraction, placed a gentle hand on his. "Adebayo, is everything all right? You've been quiet all evening." Adebayo looked into her eyes, feeling a pang of guilt. He had never kept secrets from Zainab, but something about this decision felt different. He wanted to make her proud, to give her everything she ever dreamed of, but the weight of the loan lingered in his mind. "I've been offered an opportunity, Zainab," he said, his voice steady but unsure. "Musa has a supplier overseas who is selling goods at a very low price. I'm thinking of taking out a loan to buy them in bulk. The profit potential is enormous, and it could really help our business grow." Zainab's face hardened slightly as she heard the words, her concern evident. "Adebayo, we've always built this life slowly and carefully. We've never taken a loan this big. You know how risky it is. If something goes wrong, we could lose everything, the house, the business." Adebayo cut her off, his voice a little sharper than he intended. "I know the risks, Zainab, but this is different. This is a chance for us to secure a future where we don't have to worry. I can't let this slip away. I need to take this chance." Zainab looked at him, her eyes filled with love and concern. "I know you want the best for us, Adebayo, but sometimes the best things come when we are patient. We don't need to rush into this. I'm worried that if we borrow too much, we'll be putting ourselves in a position we can't get out of." But Adebayo had already made up his mind. He had worked too hard for too long to let this opportunity pass. He wanted to prove to Zainab and to himself that he could handle it. His love for her, and his desire to give her everything, blinded him to the dangers that lay ahead. The next day, Adebayo went to the bank. He didn't tell Zainab about the loan, knowing she would disapprove. Instead, he signed the paperwork, using their house and business as collateral. With the money in hand, he arranged to purchase the goods from the overseas supplier. As the weeks went by, Adebayo eagerly awaited the arrival of the shipment. His heart raced with excitement every time he thought about the future, the wealth he could bring to Zainab, the life they would lead. He believed that this was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. Then, one fateful morning, the call came. "Adebayo, I'm afraid we have some bad news," the voice on the other end of the line said. "The ship carrying your containers has sunk in the ocean. All of your goods are lost. We are so sorry." Adebayo's world crumbled in that moment. The money he had borrowed, the promises he had made, the dreams he had built, all of it was gone. His mind raced as he tried to process the devastating news. The ship had sunk. There was no way to recover the goods, no way to repay the loan. He sat down heavily, his hands trembling. He had gambled everything for quick wealth, and now he had nothing. He had ignored Zainab's warnings and acted out of greed, and now his life, and the future he had built with Zainab, was hanging by a thread. The heavy weight of his decision was more than he could bear. A desperate search for help. The days following the phone call were the darkest of Adebayo's life. The weight of his actions sat heavy on his chest, pressing down with unbearable force. He had not only lost the money he borrowed, but he had also betrayed Zainab's trust, something he couldn't bear to think about. He had acted out of ambition, and now he was left with nothing but regret and a growing sense of dread. Zainab, unaware of the full extent of his actions, noticed the change in her husband immediately. Adebayo no longer smiled the way he used to. His eyes, once filled with determination, now seemed dull, as if the light had gone out of them. He spent his nights awake, staring at the ceiling, while Zainab, too, struggled to sleep, sensing the unease in him. One evening, as the tension between them became unbearable, Adebayo finally confessed. "Zainab," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I've made a terrible mistake. I took out the loan, without your consent. I wanted to prove something, to show that I could make everything better for us, but now everything is ruined. I've lost it all, and I don't know what to do." Zainab's face paled. She had suspected something was wrong, but hearing the truth made the reality sink in like a stone. "Adebayo, why? Why didn't you listen to me?" Her voice shook with hurt and disbelief. "We had everything. Now we've lost it all." "I was greedy," Adebayo admitted, his voice thick with guilt. "I thought I could make it big, and I could give you the world. But now, I've put us in a terrible situation. I don't know how to fix this, Zainab." His words hung in the air like a curse. Zainab didn't speak for a long time. She simply sat there, tears running down her face, her heart breaking for the life they had dreamed of, now shattered in an instant. She had always known that Adebayo could be impulsive, but this was too much. "I'll try to find a way to make it right," Adebayo finally said, his voice filled with desperation. "I'll fix this, I promise." With no solution in sight, Adebayo began visiting everyone he could think of for help. He reached out to friends and family members, hoping for some sign of mercy or support. But each visit ended in rejection. They were all sympathetic, but no one was willing to lend him the money or offer any kind of help. The debts were too large, the damage too great. The more Adebayo pleaded, the more he realized just how alone he had become. The pressure was building. With each passing day, the possibility of losing everything, his business, his home, and his dignity, grew more real. He began to wonder if there was anyone who could help him now. That's when he remembered Oluwade, the wealthy and mysterious man who lived on the outskirts of the village. Oluwade was rumored to have powers beyond the understanding of ordinary people. Some said he had made his fortune through the occult, and others whispered that he was involved in dark rituals. Adebayo knew that seeking help from someone like Oluwade was dangerous, but desperation can make people do things they would never have considered before. With no other choice, Adebayo made up his mind and decided to visit the enigmatic man. Oluwade's house was a grand, imposing structure, far more lavish than anything else in the village. The gates were always closed, and the air around the mansion felt thick with mystery. As Adebayo approached, he could feel his heart racing in his chest, a mixture of fear and curiosity overwhelming him. He knocked on the large wooden door, and after a moment, it creaked open, revealing Oluwade standing in the doorway. The man's presence was commanding, and his eyes held a strange, almost predatory glint. "You came," Oluwade said, his voice smooth like velvet, though it carried an unsettling undertone. "I knew you would. I've been waiting for you, Adebayo." Adebayo hesitated but then stepped forward, his desperation overpowering his fear. "I need your help, Oluwade," he said, his voice strained. "I've lost everything. I took a loan, and now the shipment I invested in is gone. I don't know what to do. Please, I need help." Oluwade regarded him silently for a moment, his gaze piercing. Then, with a slight smile, he said, "I can help you, Adebayo. I can give you the money to recover your losses. But it comes with a price. Everything has a cost. I will help you, but in return, you must join my society. There is no going back once you accept. Are you willing to pay the price?" Adebayo's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard the rumors, of course. People in the village spoke of the strange happenings around Oluwade, the wealth he had accumulated, and the dark powers he was said to possess. The thought of joining such a society filled him with dread, but what choice did he have? His family was on the line, and this was his only chance. I will do it," Adebayo said, his voice trembling. "I'll join your society. Just please, help me." Oluwade's smile widened, as if he had been expecting this answer. "Very well," he said, his voice taking on a deeper, more ominous tone. "You will not regret this decision, Adebayo. Come, I will perform the ritual." Adebayo followed him into the mansion, where strange symbols and artifacts lined the walls. The air was thick with incense, and an eerie silence seemed to hang in the atmosphere. Oluwade led him to a dimly lit room, where a large wooden table stood at the center. On it lay a small, intricately carved chest. "Sit," Oluwade instructed, his voice calm but commanding. Adebayo obeyed, his heart racing. Oluwade opened the chest and pulled out a bundle of cloth tied with red string. "This ritual will give you what you seek, but it will take something in return," he warned. "You must never forget the price you are paying." With a few whispered words in a language Adebayo did not understand, Oluwade began the ritual. He poured a dark liquid from a vial into a small cup and handed it to Adebayo. "Drink," he said simply. Adebayo hesitated but then, driven by desperation, took the cup and drank. The liquid burned as it slid down his throat, and an odd feeling washed over him. His vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, the room seemed brighter, the air heavier. Oluwade smiled, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. "The deal is struck. You will have the money you need to recover your losses. But remember, Adebayo, nothing is ever truly free." Adebayo stood up, feeling lightheaded but also relieved. The weight of his financial troubles had been lifted. Oluwade handed him a small bag of coins, a fortune beyond what Adebayo had ever imagined. "Thank you," Adebayo murmured, unable to hide the gratitude in his voice. He was too overwhelmed with relief to think clearly. "You have what you wanted," Oluwade said, his smile curling at the edges. "But remember, the consequences of your choice will follow you. And one day, you will come to understand what it truly cost you." Adebayo left the mansion, clutching the bag of money tightly. For a moment, everything seemed right again. He could pay off the loan, fix his business, and rebuild his life. But as the weight of the money in his hands grew heavier, a seed of doubt began to grow within him. Was the price he had paid truly worth it? The price of power. Adebayo walked through the door, his steps heavy with the weight of the money he had just received. He was relieved, but there was an unsettling feeling deep inside him that he couldn't quite shake. The money was exactly what he needed to clear his debts and rebuild his life, but as he clutched the bag tightly, a gnawing doubt continued to whisper at the back of his mind. Zainab, who had been anxiously waiting for his return, noticed a change in her husband the moment he entered the house. His eyes, once filled with love and care, now seemed distant, almost cold. Adebayo was no longer the man she had married, the man who had promised her they would face everything together. The joy he once radiated had been replaced by an unsettling calm, and Zainab couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. "Welcome home, Adebayo," Zainab said, her voice soft but tinged with concern. "How did everything go? Did you find a way to fix things?" Adebayo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I did," he replied, holding up the bag of money. "I found a way. The debt is paid, and I'll be able to restore the business. Everything will be fine now." Zainab studied him carefully. There was something in his demeanor, in the way he spoke, that made her uneasy. She had seen Adebayo overcome challenges before, but this time, the change in him was more than just a shift in mood. His entire aura had changed, and it was as if the weight of something darker had settled over him. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew something was off. Over the next few days, Zainab watched Adebayo closely. He continued to spend long hours at work, but even when he was home, he was distant. His smile, when he gave it, was forced. The house felt quieter, and the warmth that had once filled every corner now seemed absent. She tried to reach out to him, to talk about their future and the arrival of their child, but Adebayo's responses were brief, as if he wasn't really there. Zainab, now heavily pregnant, began to feel a growing unease. She could no longer ignore the changes in him. Late one evening, when Adebayo was out of the house attending to some business, Zainab decided to go into the back room to check on some things. It was a room they had never really used, tucked away at the far end of the house. But as she walked past it, she noticed that the door, which had always been locked, was now slightly ajar. Her heart skipped a beat. She had never seen Adebayo unlock the door before. She hesitated for a moment, torn between curiosity and caution. But her instincts pushed her forward. She quietly opened the door, peeking inside. What she saw made her blood run cold. The room was dimly lit, and in the center stood a small, wooden coffin. The sight of it sent a shiver through her body. She stepped closer, her breath quickening. She had to know what was inside. With trembling hands, she slowly lifted the lid of the coffin. To her horror, inside lay the lifeless body of their son, Aminu. Zainab gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Tears sprang to her eyes as she stared at the body of their child, her child, the one they had both eagerly awaited. The room began to spin, and she felt as though the ground beneath her was crumbling. How could this be? How could Adebayo have hidden this from her? She rushed out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She found Adebayo in the living room, sitting quietly with his head lowered. His posture was rigid, as if he too had felt the weight of the moment. When he heard Zainab's frantic footsteps, he turned to face her. "Zainab, what's wrong?" Adebayo asked, his voice cold and detached. What's wrong? Zainab repeated, her voice trembling. Adebayo, what is this? Why is Aminu dead? Why is his body hidden away in that coffin? Adebayo's heart sank as he saw the raw pain in her eyes. For a moment, he considered lying, but deep down, he knew there was no way to hide the truth any longer. He had already gone too far. With a deep sigh, Adebayo slowly stood up and walked over to her. Zainab, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know. I didn't understand the price. His voice cracked as he spoke, the guilt threatening to choke him. I went to Oluyewode, remember? I needed help, and he offered me a way out. But I didn't know. I didn't know it would cost us this much. Zainab's face twisted in confusion and disbelief. What are you saying? What did you do, Adebayo? What cost are you talking about? Adebayo's voice dropped to a whisper, as if confessing his darkest secret. The ritual, when I accepted his help, I unknowingly sacrificed Aminu. It was part of the deal. Oluyewode never told me that the price would be so high. I thought it was just about wealth, but it took our son. I didn't know. I didn't know. Zainab staggered backward as though she had been struck. Her hand clutched her chest as if the very air had been knocked out of her. You killed our son. For money. Adebayo, how could you? Tears streamed down her face as the reality of his words sank in. She felt betrayed, shattered in a way that words could never describe. The man she had loved, the father of her child, had made a choice that had stolen their future and their son from them. Adebayo collapsed to his knees, his face buried in his hands. I didn't know, Zainab. I didn't know it would cost us so much. I wanted to give you everything we both dreamed of. But now, I've lost everything. I've lost you, and I've lost Aminu. My greed has destroyed us. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. But Zainab could barely speak. The shock and betrayal were too much to bear. She stared at Adebayo, her heart breaking into pieces. How can I forgive you, Adebayo? How? You took everything from us, everything I held dear. Adebayo's world crumbled as Zainab's words pierced his soul. He had been blinded by his desire for wealth, for success. In his quest to provide for her, he had lost the very thing that mattered most, the love of his wife and the life of his child. As Zainab slowly turned away, her hand pressed against her swollen belly, Adebayo realized the full weight of his actions. The price of power, of greed, had been too high. And now, there was no turning back. In the silence that followed, the haunting realization began to settle in. He had sacrificed his family for riches, and in doing so, had destroyed everything he had ever loved, the ultimate choice. The days after the horrifying discovery were filled with a heavy silence that hung between Adebayo and Zainab. The once loving home they had built together now felt like a prison, cold and oppressive. Zainab's heart, once full of love for her husband, was shattered, and the future she had envisioned for herself and their child seemed to crumble before her eyes. She had never imagined that Adebayo, the man she had trusted with everything, could do something so terrible. Zainab had always believed in the goodness of his heart. She had seen his struggles, his hard work, and his dreams for their family. But now, it felt as though those dreams had been built on a foundation of lies, sacrifice, and greed. The discovery of Aminu's body, their child, had torn Zainab's soul apart. Adebayo's confession had shattered everything, and now she couldn't look at him without feeling disgust, fear, and an overwhelming sadness. She had tried to talk to him, tried to understand how he could have made such a monstrous choice, but each attempt only made the pain worse. The love she had once felt for him seemed so distant now, clouded by the awful truth of his actions. One evening, after another long day of silence, Zainab made a decision that broke her heart. She could no longer stay with Adebayo. Fear gripped her as she thought about the future, the baby growing inside her, the danger that she now sensed in her own home. How could she trust him again? How could she live with the man who had killed their son, a man who had made a deal with a man like Oluwade, someone whose power was beyond anything she understood? With tears in her eyes, she turned to Adebayo. "I can't stay with you," she said softly, her voice quivering. "I can't do this anymore, Adebayo. I'm scared, for myself, for my child. I can't trust you. I don't know who you are anymore." Adebayo's words seemed to collapse around him as he heard her words. He had feared this moment, but the reality of it was even worse than he had imagined. He had known that Zainab would struggle with what he had done, but he had hoped, foolishly, that she would somehow understand. Now, her pain, her heartbreak, was a mirror of his own guilt, and the realization hit him like a thunderbolt. He had destroyed everything, his marriage, his family, and his future, all for the sake of a fleeting dream of wealth. "Zainab, please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this life. Please, don't leave me." Zainab looked at him, her heart torn between love and fear. "You've already hurt me, Adebayo," she whispered. "You've taken everything from me. I don't know how to forgive you. I don't know if I can." Before Zainab could leave, Adebayo's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was a call from Oluwade. "Do not try to run from this, Adebayo." The voice on the other end of the line was calm, yet filled with an unmistakable menace. "You have made a choice, and you are bound by it. But there is one final decision you must make. If you want to keep the wealth, if you want to keep the life I have given you, you must choose between your wife and your future. You must kill Zainab, or you will lose everything, including your life." Adebayo's stomach twisted in horror. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The offer was clear: kill Zainab and ensure his continued wealth, or refuse and suffer the consequences. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts, his heart torn between love and fear. Zainab, his wife, his partner, how could he ever harm her? But the consequences of defying Oluwade were far worse than anything he could imagine. He had seen the power that Oluwade wielded, and he knew that refusing would lead to his own destruction. For a long moment, Adebayo stood frozen, the weight of his choices bearing down on him. He couldn't look at Zainab. How could he choose between her and everything he had gained? How could he sacrifice his wife, the woman he had once sworn to protect, for the sake of wealth and power? But as he stood there, torn apart by the impossible choice, a moment of clarity broke through the confusion. He realized that he didn't want the wealth, the power, or the life that had come with it. It was all built on the blood of his own child, and now, it would cost him his soul. No amount of money could bring back Aminu, and no amount of wealth could restore the love he had once shared with Zainab. He had made a terrible mistake, and now it was time to undo it, to try and make amends. Adebayo turned to Zainab, his eyes filled with desperation and regret. "Zainab, I've done horrible things. I've let greed cloud my judgment. But I swear to you, I never wanted any of this. I can't hurt you. I can't kill you. I've already lost too much. I will face the consequences. I'll go to the authorities. I'll do whatever it takes, but I won't hurt you. I won't lose you too." Zainab stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard the pain in Adebayo's voice, and though the truth of his actions still weighed heavily on her, she saw something in him that had been lost, the man she had once loved, the man who was willing to fight for her, even if it meant losing everything. Tears filled Zainab's eyes as she looked at him, her own heart breaking. "Adebayo, I don't know if I can ever forgive you. What you've done, it's unforgivable. But I don't want to see you destroy yourself. I don't want to see you destroy us anymore. The two stood in silence, the heavy weight of their pain settling between them. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they both knew that they couldn't continue down the path they had started on. They had both made terrible choices, but now it was time to make a different decision, a decision to rebuild their lives, to face the truth, and to seek redemption. As Adebayo held Zainab in his arms, the weight of their shared grief pressed upon them, but for the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could start over. Redemption and forgiveness. The days following Adebayo's decision to confess to Zainab were the hardest of his life. Despite his confession, the rift between them had only grown wider. Zainab, though still grieving the loss of their son, Aminu, felt betrayed in a way she couldn't yet understand. The life she had shared with Adebayo, the love they had built, seemed like a distant memory, a cruel illusion shattered by the terrible truth of his actions. Every night, as she lay in bed, the emptiness of their home filled her with sorrow. Adebayo, meanwhile, spent his days in isolation, his heart heavy with guilt. He wandered through the streets, aimlessly lost in his thoughts. The wealth he had once sought so desperately now felt like an unbearable weight, a curse rather than a blessing. The house he had fought so hard to build felt hollow, filled with echoes of decisions made in moments of desperation. One evening, as Zainab sat by the window, staring out at the village, she felt a pull within her heart, a need to seek something greater than herself, something that could help her find peace and healing. Despite her pain and distrust, she knew she couldn't carry this burden alone. The wounds were too deep, and the path to forgiveness seemed so unclear. She needed guidance. Zainab made a decision. She would visit Pastor Tond, the spiritual leader in their village known for his wisdom and deep faith. She had heard whispers of his ability to help people heal from their deepest wounds, and though she was hesitant at first, something inside her told her it was time to seek help. The next day, Zainab made her way to Pastor Tond's humble church. She had known the pastor for years, but never in her life had she felt such a deep need for his guidance. As she entered the church, the calm, peaceful atmosphere seemed to envelop her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a small sense of relief. Pastor Tond, an elderly man with a kind face and a warm presence, greeted Zainab with a gentle smile. He could see the sorrow in her eyes, the weight she carried on her shoulders. Without asking, he led her to a quiet room, where they could speak in private. Zainab poured out her heart, telling Pastor Tond everything, about Adebayo's betrayal, about the pact he had made with Oluwode, and the destruction it had brought to their lives. She spoke of the pain she felt, of how her trust in Adebayo had been shattered, and how she could not find a way to move forward. The words flowed from her like a river, full of grief, confusion, and a yearning for peace. When Zainab had finished speaking, Pastor Tond sat quietly for a moment, allowing her words to settle in the stillness of the room. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm yet firm. "Zainab," he said softly, "I hear the pain in your words, but I also hear your desire for healing. Forgiveness is not easy, but it is the path to freedom. You cannot carry the weight of anger and resentment forever. They will only eat at your soul. But forgiveness, though difficult, will set you free. And you must also learn to break free from the influence of evil." Zainab looked at him, confused. "But how can I forgive Adebayo? How can I trust him again after everything he has done?" Pastor Tond smiled gently. "Forgiveness is not about forgetting, Zainab. It is about letting go of the power that the hurt has over you. You see, when you hold on to your anger, you give that anger control over your life. But when you forgive, you take back that power. You release yourself from the chains that bind you. Forgiveness is a choice, a difficult choice, but a choice that will free you. And as for Adebayo, he must seek his own redemption. But the first step for both of you is to break free from the darkness that has gripped your heart. Zainab nodded slowly, the weight of Pastor Ton's words settling within her. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that she couldn't continue living with this anger and pain. She had to find a way to heal, even if it meant letting go of the past. Pastor Ton continued, "You are stronger than you know, Zainab. And sometimes, healing comes from faith. Trust in God's plan, and allow your heart to find peace. He will guide you, if you are willing to listen." Zainab left Pastor Ton's church that day with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in months. She didn't know how long it would take to heal, but she knew that forgiveness was the first step. It wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to try. Adebayo, too, was struggling with his own sense of guilt. After hearing Zainab's confession, he knew he had lost her trust, and he couldn't bear the thought of living the rest of his life without her. He realized that he could not change the past, but he had to try to make things right. He had sought help from Oluyewade, but now he was desperate to seek a higher path, a path of redemption. With a heavy heart, Adebayo went to Pastor Tond, seeking the guidance he so desperately needed. He confessed his sins, explaining everything, from the deal he had struck with Oluyewade to the sacrifices he had made. He expressed his regret, his pain, and his willingness to leave behind everything he had gained through that dark pact. Pastor Tond listened to Adebayo, his face solemn. When Adebayo finished, the pastor spoke with a quiet authority. "Adebayo, you must repent and renounce the evil that has entered your life. You cannot continue living in the shadow of the choices you've made. But God's grace is greater than any sin. If you are truly sorry, and if you are willing to leave behind the power that has corrupted your soul, there is redemption. You must break ties with the evil you have embraced. Only then can you begin to rebuild your life, and perhaps, your relationship with Zainab." Adebayo fell to his knees, tears filling his eyes. "I'm willing to do anything. Please, show me the way." Together, Pastor Tond, Adebayo, and Zainab, who had come to support her husband, underwent a spiritual cleansing. They renounced the pact with Oluyewade and asked for God's forgiveness, seeking to break free from the grip of darkness that had held them captive. As they prayed together, the weight of their past sins seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and faith. In the months that followed, Adebayo and Zainab worked to rebuild their lives. It was not easy, and there were many days of struggle and heartache. But with time, their love began to grow stronger again, now rooted in trust, faith, and the lessons they had learned. The material wealth that had once consumed Adebayo was no longer important. What mattered now was their love for each other, their family, and the peace they had found in faith. Though they would never forget the pain of their past, Adebayo and Zainab had come to understand that redemption and forgiveness were not just about words, they were about action, about healing, and about moving forward together. Their story was one of love and loss, but also of the power of redemption and the healing that comes from embracing the light. Together, they walked a new path, one that led them toward a brighter, more hopeful future.